we are here to talk about when values meet reality. And within businesses, there's this idea of having company values, and that's really going to guide how the company works. But what does that mean in practice? Particularly if you are the company and you are a company of one. What does that mean? So we're going to do a little bit of an exploration with Stephanie here, who's part of our Happy Startup community, who's part of the Vision 2020 program, and just unpick and unpack for ourselves what that means, and hopefully for Stephanie, so that if you're listening to this, you'll get something out of it as well. If you are listening live, because we are recording this on Crowdcast, please engage in the chat, put your thoughts, your ideas. We'd love to riff off of that as we go along. Okay, so that's the setup. Sorry, Zoe, that you missed the intro. Hopefully that's helped. Who, Lawrence or Lana, would like to kick off with this? I don't know if you have a story about when values became very important in terms of a business decision.
Shall I break the mold and go first? Because normally Lana goes first.
Go for it.
Start before you're ready. So yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is why me and Carlos started thinking about values in the first place. And the first thing that came to mind was actually when we had our first hire in our agency. This is, God knows how many years ago now, probably like 17 years ago or something crazy. And the interesting thing about that was, because we've been friends for so long before we set up in business together, I don't think we'd ever sat down. Well, I know we hadn't sat down and say, what are our values? You know, it's not something you do as friends necessarily. Maybe people do, but we weren't that enlightened. So, but then I realized when we were looking to hire someone, there was an element of what traits are we looking for in someone else that we want to bring in to the company that we're in. And so this idea of actually what's the culture we want to create? What's the vibe we want to create? What traits, what values are we looking for in this person that we want to bring into the company? So I think that in some ways made us look back and say, actually, what are we about? Like, not what would we like to be, what have we done up till now? And I'm a believer in, there's a line that's put out, values are what you do, not what you say you do. And I'm a believer in that. So not to be an aspirational thing, but to be actually, what do we do? How do we live this? Rather than, we were talking the other day, Stephanie, how do we laminate this? Really living these values. So I remember that's what led up me and Carlos to start thinking about this seriously, was sitting down on the beach and working out what are we about, what's the DNA of our business, even if it's just me and you, and starting to think about this seriously. So yeah, that set us on the path. We can dig a bit more maybe into how that played out over the years.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lawrence. And for me, the experience that really came up strongly in this, prompting around values and how it collides with business is an experience that I had with a previous client, and having to make the decision of, do I continue with this client or not? It was really an I would say it was really a moment of defining, okay, is this something that still connects with me? Is it something that is important for me? Do I really care about this cause? Is this, a good exchange of my time and energy? So there was a lot of recalibrating that had to happen before I decided to say, okay, then this is not for me anymore. It might be that at the time that I was working with them, that it was, fulfilling the values that I had, and the needs that I had at the moment. Yet, after working with them for some time, I realized that it was not incongruence anymore with the values and how I would want to show up in life. So there is an element here for me of that values are are, I would say, are concepts that we iterate and recalibrate depending on the context and depending on who we are, where we are, and the time frame that we are in that given moment. They're compasses, yes, and at the same time they're, I would say there's an element here of, it's not a static what's this concept or theme that we hold, and that was, for me, that was that experience of realizing the incongruence that I had with the client.
Thank you, Lana. So I've been backing and forthing with Stephanie on these ideas of values, and also had a conversation this morning which helped me clarify my own sort of experience or relationship to them. So in terms of a story, the story that came up actually was while we were running Spook Studio, the digital agency. I was approached by someone who worked for a company called Autonomy. And if you know, remember, it was one of the biggest tech companies in the UK. And I had experience with that software, and they were asking me if I wanted to join them as a consultant. Lots of money. It was a place where basically you had to be really clever. I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but there's just like, I have value. There's a value around learning, a value around intelligence, a value about really cutting edge thinking that really attracted me to that kind of work, because it was basically it was the early stages of AI, commercializing AI technology. It's like, whoa, that'd be amazing to be in. And I recognize a need for connection, a need for, I call it safety. And that's need was met by working with Lawrence. And so this is where values and needs for me was an interesting sort of like connection here, because the need wasn't an articulated thing. It was visceral. It's like, sounds like a great idea, but it doesn't feel right. And values were, they're words that are kind of like, I'd love to be this kind of person. This is the kind of way I want to be. But it wasn't as deep in a sense. Or I hadn't integrated basically the needs with the values as much. And so that was like for me, I wouldn't say a sliding doors moment, because it wasn't like a 50-50 do this, but there's a real strong, all right, I value this kind of work, but I need this. And that need was important. And I would say, I felt I've made the right choice, because the needs have now turned into values. Needs for connection. My values are community. I value community. I really believe in the idea of community, and I've worked out more and more why those two things work together, and why this business called the Happy Startup School, the way it's working at the moment, makes so much sense to me. So there's just a little example there. Stephanie, you've heard our little stories, which you were asking about. What comes up for you?
Yeah, I think I asked the question initially because for me, sometimes all these sort of terms and ideas like needs, values, beliefs, standards, all that stuff can get a bit like heady. And I always need to find some way to embody it, because otherwise I don't necessarily see the value in these things. And so that's what sort of prompted my question as to, okay, you have this happy festo, manifesto, and it looks amazing and it looks a lot like fun, but sometimes these things, when they're literally laminated and they're sort of static, it takes away the dynamism of it, and it takes away sort of the living aspect of it. And so these examples already give me such a good insight in how to sort of work with those things for yourself as a sort of guiding principle to come back to when maybe things are unclear, and then you're like, oh, what should I do? What should I choose? But I'm getting also clear on the fact that this remains a bodily experience, which sometimes it's I think it's interesting and important and helpful to be able to articulate it, or to maybe find words around them so you can come back to them and you don't necessarily have to do the whole process, every time that you might be struggling with something. But again, it is a living thing. It's a moving thing. And especially when you work with others, maybe within one team or one company, I can imagine it's very good to have that sort of place where you can come back to, almost to see like, oh, wait a second, there's friction, or we're struggling. How come? Are we still aligned? And do we still value the same things? Because it's already quite, I think, challenging, or maybe it's a good challenge to have to get clear on your own values, let alone having to sort of get clear on this when working with a group or within a company. To me, sometimes that can get confusing really quickly, because I do love to question things. And and so having this discussion about why, like maybe even taking a step back as to why, to begin with, is it important or valuable to get clear on your values? Like, why do we have to do that? And what is the difference between needs and values? Like, we had a little talk before, Carlos, like maybe they're the same, or maybe one is the expression of the other. And how is that, how can that work together? How can you create a framework so that it can work for you, instead of you being imprisoned maybe by these things that we call values, and then thinking we have to live up to the values when they might not even be important for us anymore. So in my brain, lots is always happening, and that's what prompted the question. And I think,
I love that invitation, and I think that let's go round. Let's, given what Stephanie has put on the table, how would you tackle that? What is it that's coming up for each of you? Lawrence, Lana, who wants to take a bite first?
I can start with one of the things that really comes up strongly for me in this conversation around values is to not get into binary thinking. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the pitfalls that we often experience when we're talking about values, or when we're talking about needs. It's like it's an either or. It needs to be this, or it cannot be this. Mm-hmm. And that for me has been an unlearning process, for me to think of values as accompaniment to the different parts. So different parts of me might value different things, and I might value different practices. And in any given moment that I'm engaging or interacting with another person or an organization, this the importance of values is to help me to be in congruence with is this how I'd want to show up in life? And another question that I ask for myself is, is this what I care about? Are these people who I care about? So it helps me to realign with, before getting into an agreement, am I in a full yes to something? And this is where the body, the somatic practice is very important, because then I lean into what is my body telling me. But for me, again, going back to that parts, the idea of different parts might have different values and different needs. And at any given moment, the priorities shift based on what is it in that given, what is needed. And for me, there's this, I would say, the use of compromise is somewhat tricky, but there is, for me, an understanding of, what am I willing to pursue at that moment that is within my capacity. So say, for example, if, working with a client is not really fully aligned, yet financially you really need it, then my question for myself would be, okay, till how long can I take this on that makes me be in integrity with myself? So that's a part, right? That's the part that's speaking to the financial needs. There's a part that's speaking to being in integrity. There's a part that's speaking to time and how long can I continue this. So I see the interplay of values is in the interplay of also of our different parts.
Yeah. And what I'm also hearing you say is that it helps you to sort of prioritize, to really sort of get clear on what is my need now. If there's some sort of urgency at play, like what do I need to value now, or not value maybe, but what do I need to do now to get moving, without necessarily forgetting about the other things that you value. There's a sort of like immediacy, short-term, long-term play that I hear you say. And you live your values by actually reflecting on them and asking. The questions are basically the values, right? Because the type of questions that you're asking yourself, they showcase what you value.
Yeah.
And self-reflection is one of them, I think, if I'm hearing this correctly. Thanks.
Lawrence?
Yeah, so I kind of feel similar to what Tatiana's put in the chat here, that certainly from my perspective, I think of values as not changing a lot, actually more about like who we are and how we want to be in the world. And I know this can change over life, but I see needs as something that changes more. So when Lala's talking about like what is it I value at this point, I would see that or view that personally as a need, and needs changing throughout lifetime, throughout life phases. My kids are growing up. There's different needs that I have at this point in my life than I did 2 years ago, even because the circumstances around me are changing. Whereas I would see my values evolving but not changing as radically. I personally find values really useful as a language to use, like you said, Stephanie, as a way to connect to people. So whether it's people on your team, like me and Carlos as co-founders, us hiring our first recruit, the manifesto is there to connect us to the people that we want to serve. And so it's a language to say, this is what I believe in or we believe in. Are you in? So it becomes a filter, a way to filter in the people that we want and filter out the people that we don't necessarily think that will be part of our world, part of our community. So there is a danger, like you said, Stephanie, that, and I'm sure lots of us have worked in companies where there's a culture program, there's a values piece, and it just gets done and no one really believes in it or feels connected to it. So some of us are a bit blinded by this work. And also, I believe it is powerful when it comes from our authentic self. So people that come through our community have something to offer, and they need to find a way to tell that story to others in a way that connects to their own source of creativity and energy. So I find it useful as a way to find like-minded people. Now, that's not to say that that might evolve over time. But yeah, I would say the tricky thing I've found is like I haven't refreshed my values as an individual over the last few years, but I've definitely refreshed my needs. So yeah. I think that's a process to unravel. How about you, Carlos?
See, I'm curious about that whole thing about needs and how they change. Because I have a belief that there are core emotional needs that will never change for me. They will play maybe different roles and priorities in my life, but they're always there. And there are some things that will always be very important to me. And for me, this idea, what's the point of articulating values? Why do we do that? Is our question I heard. And so there's two aspects to this I wanted to tackle. Firstly, from like an organizational perspective, yeah, how do we work at scale? And when I say at scale, it's just more than two people. How are we going to work out where are we going? What are we doing? Because like in an ideal world, we're all kind of telepaths and we know exactly where everyone's coming from. But if we don't articulate, we don't thingify the thoughts in our heads, then no one will know what's going on. And so you end up going in different directions and nothing gets done. You don't build the bridge, you don't build the business, you don't do anything because everyone's like wanting to go in, they all just want to do the design, but they don't necessarily want to put the bricks on top of the bricks. Yeah, so there's an aspect of this of like, how do we come together? And if you want to come together, this is the thing. If you the lovely thing is you don't need to articulate your values if you live purely day by day. For someone I think who is driven so intrinsically, and some enlightened person is like, I feel like doing this today. I feel like if you're in that space, I don't think you need to articulate your values. But if you are interacting with someone else and you suddenly change your mind and they say, why are you changing your mind? It's like, well, because. And he's like, oh, because. And you go off. It's like, well, then either you don't value their opinion or how they are, or you want to say, do you know what? For me, this thing is important. And when I say this thing is important, that's a value. To travel is important, to be at home is important, to have safety is important, to be in community is important, to be mindful of the environment is important. Yeah. But then to just suddenly lay into someone, why are you doing that? Pick up that rubbish. It's like, oh, it's like, why are you attacking me? It's like, because I value our environment. So for me, this process I'm like, there's a meta aspect to this. Like everything we do, like myself, Lawrence, and Lana, we coach not because we know exactly what you need to do, because we're curious about what is it you want. And we can't understand what you want unless you really start to articulate that. And so this whole process, whether it's values or products or businesses, is how do we articulate what's inside? So yeah, short answer, without doing that work of connecting words to feelings, we're just reacting to other people's reactions.
And I'd like to also bring in the word alignment, right? Of when we are able to articulate our values and we are able to invite people in, with awareness of those values, then it's also I would say there's also more possibilities in aligning ourselves around those values.
Yeah.
Dave is just sorry, go for Lauren. I was going to say Dave's mentioning PropellerNet, and so he's now, and how the employees are super engaged with the company values. And so our experience of PropellerNet and Jack, who's the founder, my understanding, maybe Lawrence, you can have it. There's a lot of the culture that I experienced at PropellerNet when I was, we were there, was driven by Jack. Yeah, there was a very much inside out approach to that. He infused a lot of that energy when I was there, and it evolves because different people take on that mantle. But one of our first ever talks at summer camp is bucket list business planning, which is Jack Hubbard talking about why he runs his business the way he does, and that talk was a strong articulation of his values, and what that did was that met the needs and also aligned with the values of the people who joined the business and stayed. And Lawrence, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, it kind of leads into what I was going to say, really, and I'm sure, Stephanie, you're a designer, you know this, but if designers are trying to help other people articulate their vision and their culture and their values to other people, how do you do that? So I think this is where it's also important. And what I see is, and when we first started with Happy Startup School, this was our opportunity to live more aligned to our values, because I certainly felt like towards the last few months and years of the agency, it wasn't feeling aligned. And so this was a chance to think about how we want to come across. And one of the things that was important was to talk like friends, not to talk like business contacts. And so the way we communicated, the tone of voice we used, the visuals that we used, we made things fun, we made things friendly, we made things accessible. And so all of these things helped to convey what we believe was important in how business could and should be. Why does business have to be so serious? Let's try and create a way to engage with business that feels more fun and accessible to your accidental entrepreneur who doesn't think of themselves as a money hungry billionaire type. And so this became useful as a way, again, another language, whether it's visual or words, to be able to, ideally when someone comes in contact with our work, they feel connected to it, not even without meeting us, but just the idea of these values coming out through the way we communicate. So I guess that's another angle to this, is not just thinking about the brand as separate, but how do the assets and the materials we create communicate what we're about at our heart.
Yeah.
I'd like to add that it's something that allows other people to connect to us from afar and disconnect.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very good filtering mechanism.
Yeah. It's actually, I would say this is leading by example. It is literally living what you believe in, but also then there's also a sense of accountability in terms of how can we hold ourselves accountable to this sort of thing that we're trying to do by doing it ourselves, because that's what I sometimes found working within and for other companies, that there was sort of the values or the manifesto or whatever, but I could see certain layers in the company, especially management or C-suite level, doing things that were not congruent with those values. And then it was a bit like, oh, so you expect the employees to do it, but not as management. And that created such sort of friction within me, leaving the company eventually, because I just thought this is not leading by example, or not doing what we're saying that we're doing, or not everybody is saying what we are doing what we're saying. So that's also beautiful. And it also sort of touches on attunement. I've written down. It's also sort of a way of language communicating, but also saying like, I respect you, so let's attune to each other. And so values can change or talk about needs, but it's also creating that sort of basis of trust, I think, which is, I think, a very beautiful
and
way.
Consistency, I would argue as well, because it's the consistent actions that make something a value, I think, not what we hope it to be. So
yeah, but I've heard from a place of you want to do it this way because this is what brings you alive, and not we have to do it this way because XYZ. Is that?
Yeah. And I've heard some, I'm sure we've all heard some stories of companies that on the outside look like they've got an amazing culture and the brand looks amazing and it's very accessible and friendly. And like you said, some of the stories of the actual reality of those companies inside are very different. So
yeah,
my hope is in this day and age that's harder to do, just given there's more transparency around. But again, it's not. They still exist, sadly.
Yes.
Okay, I'm conscious of time.
Yeah. I before we drop off, I just want to, because there's a question from Simon that I thought would be nice to tackle quickly before we have some final thoughts. Simon asks, and I'm going to bring it up on screen as well so that we got something to look at while we're asking it. So Simon asks, do you think that communicating your values and your authentic self will attract clients and collaborators and business that will be more aligned with your values? Okay. Answers. Lawrence.
It's really good. Do you think communicating your values and authentic self will attract clients? Well, I suppose in short, yes. I think it's about how bold you want to be ultimately, because some values can just seem very sort of omnipresent, let's say. So like I've been working with Caro and Yoba, some of you may know from the community, and they're putting on an event in Groningen in Netherlands in February. And at the heart of their essence, I feel, is like this inner rebel, this kind of punk spirit. And so they would come up with this kind of concept for an event which is based on that, and it's very much their values, it's very much how they show up in the world. And it's bold, but my hope is that it will attract people like that value those things and that connect to that spirit. So my sense is yes, it will, and also accept that some people won't like it, and that's the benefits of niching in some ways, and also for some people the pitfalls of it too.
Yeah, the word for me is resonance. Yeah, like when you show up in the ways of how you value and based from your needs, it attracts people that resonates with that. And then the conversations also become easier because there's a point of connection already that is already there.
Awesome. I'm going to agree as well. Yes, and it's one part. The two key things here: communicating, and this is where marketing, being visible, having words that articulate your values is important, because if you're not doing that, you're not communicating, and no one knows you, so you're not going to attract anything. But the other aspect of this is, what is it that they want as well? Because as a client or a collaborator, they have their own need. And so if you can't articulate the need, you can articulate the values, great, but that just means we're aligned, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can help me, or I know what you can help me with, or what you do. So, and this can be tricky for creative entrepreneurs or even artists, because there's an articulation, right? There is something, an identity that you get by liking my work and being connected with me. But that's an articulation of a thing that you do. That's my impression. So there's articulating to your values, but there's articulating, and then why would you want to engage with me? What is it you are going to get by engaging with me that I think helps? Stephanie, is there something that you'd like to add to this?
As you were saying just now, it's almost a difference between the what and the how. Maybe the what is what you can help me with, and the how is more the values of how we are coming together and how we are doing it. Maybe that could be sort of a translation, maybe, or interpretation of what you were saying. Yeah. Well, I think this whole conversation has been illuminating to me to make those terms more like alive, and how it could actually benefit me, for example, to get more clear on mine, even if it's just for now, for a starting point, to give words to it and to see like, oh, okay, this can help me then further reduce whom I can help or whom I'm for and not. Also that, because if you're creative and you're sort of inclined to be a problem solver, then sometimes it's hard to sort of say, okay, but this is not who I'm for at this point, to narrow it down and to actually, get from thinking into action. So that's a connection that I just made. That's to me is very valuable. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's more to say on this, especially as well when there's, for example, friction within a company, and how then the values are getting back to sort of a core sense of why are we doing what we're doing can help. Not sure if we really touched on that, but maybe that, I don't know. That would be another great way to sort of learn more about how values and needs could actually help collaboration, essentially. Yeah. So thank you for this. Very nice.
Final thoughts then from everyone else. Lawrence, what are your parting thoughts?
I just wrote down, based on what you said, Stephanie, like a snapshot, like a moment in time, like capturing your values now, and what's alive for you now, and not thinking too far ahead. So yeah, that's something that is coming up for me. And I think, like we've all said, it's messy, this stuff. It's not easy. It's hard work. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And that's part of the joy of this, is understanding more about ourselves, understanding more about who we want to attract, and in some ways who we don't want to attract as well. So yeah, but that's not reason not to do it. But yeah, I particularly think if we want to work with people that we really care about, and I'd say everyone in the community has either belonging or connection as a need, then it's vitally important, I think, to find a language or a way to attract and also repel those we don't want to work with. Lana?
Yeah. Well, for me, I go also with the caveat around that it's not about perfectionism and how we live our values, but rather how are we also able to hold ourselves when we create those missteps in living with our values.
Yeah, the word compassion, self-compassion along this process comes up for me. I'm really excited about this kind of conversation, because for me, the core of our work, and personally what gets me up and every morning around this work, is the self-knowledge aspect of it, is the inside-out approach to this. It's trying to actually work out who am I, and then for whom. And having a way, being able to articulate our values, I think helps. I think, like Lawrence was saying, in terms of consistency for myself, it's like, wake up, who am I again? what do I believe in? Because it's so easy to get caught up with all the and for those for them not to be vanilla values, and just like everyone's got them. It's like, no, what's mine? What's really mine? And that's where it gets tricky, because then it's like, okay, who am I? And then how does that connect to the work I want to do? And this is the messy, difficult aspect of all of this, that unless you are really committed to it, you'll just go back to business as usual and just vanilla values, laminating them, and then just trying to make loads of money.
Cool. Actually, well, thank you, Stephanie, for joining us for this inaugural AUA.
Yes, I really appreciate the comments, and everyone else as well who joined in the chat and shared their thoughts. Thank you very much, and until next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care. Have a good day.